Mesdames et Messieurs, Monsieur Gordon Brown, Premier ministre du Royaume-Uni.
65 years ago, in the thin light of a grey dawn, more than 1,000 small craft took to a rough sea on a day that will be forever a day of bravery. On that June morning, the young of our nations stepped out onto these beaches below and into history. And as long as freedom lives, their deeds will never die. And now, more than half a century on, it is an honour for me to speak for the British people, alongside friends, President Sarkozy, President Obama, Prime Minister Harper, and with His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, each of us representing the peoples of our nations, as together we salute the brave fighting men of the largest amphibious operation in the annals of warfare. We remember those who advanced grain of sand by grain of sand, utterly determined amid the bullets and the bloodshed that freedom would not be pushed back into the sea, but would rise from these beaches below to liberate a continent and to save a generation. So this is sacred ground. This day marks the triumph of right over wrong, of truth over lies, the victory of human decency over hatred and the Holocaust. For it is the only place from which, after 5 years of total war and 40 million deaths, Europe could be liberated. This is the place where the breakthrough to victory occurred, the place from where you can chart the war's end and the start of a new world. And this is the place where Britain, America, Canada, and France came together as one. People talk of Europe and America sometimes as continents that are an ocean apart, separated by thousands of miles of water and hundreds of years of different traditions. But on June 1944, at this place and in that moment, Europe and America came closer together than at any time in any century. And we are eternal allies now because of this. Allies not for a season, but for centuries evermore. People bound now for time immemorial by a shared endeavour and an unshakable faith. Those men who risked everything 65 years ago demonstrated that although tyranny may suppress, it cannot endure forever. They proved that dictatorship may for a time have the power to dictate, but that it will not in the end decide the course of the human journey. They enacted the belief that as long as one of us is not free, no one of us is free. They made real the timeless values enshrined in the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, the Charter of Liberty, and the call of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And in doing so, they embodied not just the hopes of one age, but the dreams of all ages. So intense was the cooperation between our nations that when Winston Churchill regularly asked to see strategists who were planning D-Day, he never knew until they arrived at 10 Downing Street whether the officer would be British, Canadian, or American. And so next to Obama Beach, we join President Obama in paying particular tribute to the spectacular bravery of American soldiers who gave their lives on Omaha Beach for people whose names they never knew, whose faces they never saw, and yet people who have lived in freedom thanks to their sacrifice and valour. And I know that the whole of Britain will be proud that Jack Woods is today decorated by President Sarkozy. And alongside brave and fearless Canadians, Jack Woods landed on Juno Beach on that June the 6th day, and with his comrades went on to capture 5 bridges. And the hand that will today receive the Legion of Honour from the President of France is the hand which liberated one of the first French villages to be freed. And there is an unbroken line from what happened here, through to Arnhem, to the Battle of the Bulge, to the crossing of the Rhine, to the fall of the Third Reich and the end of Europe's enslavement. On D-Day, the sounds of liberation On the March were heard right across Europe. All over France, resistance fighters began to blow up bridges and railway lines. And we have heard before, and millions have read, that in Amsterdam, a young girl, Anne Frank, was inspired to write of the news of D-Day as too wonderful, almost too like a fairy tale. And for her, even at the age of 14, it was an affirmation that humanity could triumph in the midst of carnage. In spite of all, she later wrote, I still believe that people are good at heart. And these words, written before her short life ended, in a diary she thought nobody would ever read, are perhaps the finest epitaph for those courageous young men and women of 1944. The immortal truth that people are good at heart is now an inspiration for another generation of courageous men and women in our armed forces, whose goodness today is to work for peace in every corner of the world. We salute the devotion of our armed forces. Our gratitude to them and our families must always be equal to what they give. Above all else, for you, the remaining few, the veterans who have outlived that day, that battle and that war, who gather here today with your families and with your children, so our children and our children's children will gather here year after year to honour you long after you are gone. And far beyond these moments of reflection and remembrance, the threads of your lives and your ultimate victory are already woven into the fabric of our world. Because if anybody had said on June the 6th, 1944, that we would create a new age of peace and unity in a Europe that had been torn by centuries of conflict, if anybody would have said that we would then witness a wall raised up by the hands of totalitarian power and then torn down brick by brick by the hands of people yearning to be free, if anybody had said such things in June 1944, who would have been dared to believe that all this was possible? But the impossible has happened.